One of those would-be witnesses also appeared before a judge in Bangor today. Dylan Belanger has described himself as Caruso's best friend. He previously pleaded not guilty to charges of hindering apprehension and tampering with a witness.
Today, as part of a deal with prosecutors, Belanger changed his plea to guilty to hindering apprehension. As part of the deal, the tampering charges dropped, but Belanger must continue to cooperate in the case.
Prosecutors said he lied at the start of the investigation, but eventually was truthful, leading police to Caruso's body. Belanger was emotional as the prosecutor read through details of the case.
He'll be sentenced at a later date.